First presentation of the Southwood Redevelopment Project. My name is Ray Goff. I'm the town planner here in Norfolk. I'm here with George Vallone, who is the developer from the Hoboken Brownstone Company. George is looking to redevelop the Southwood property, which is the former hospital on the east side of town, and off of Route 1A. This property fell into disuse about 15 years ago, and has had a number of developers interested in the property. George is ready to move forward with the project. He's got a great project that I think the town is going to benefit greatly from. George comes from New Jersey, Hoboken, New Jersey.
Yep.
And has done a number of projects, brownfields projects similar to this in Hoboken and in the surrounding areas in New Jersey.
Right.
And is going to give a quick presentation or presentation today about the project, and let the folks know at home what to expect out of this project as we move forward. We've had a committee that was put together through the town, the zoning working committee. There's about 9 members that have been working diligently for the last year with George, holding numbers of meetings almost on a weekly basis at times, to get through some of the details of this project and to make sure that we all get a good project. I think that's the key here. George, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience and what you've done.
Great. Thank you, Ray. So my name is George Vallone, and I'm president and co-founder of the Hoboken Brownstone Company. We're a mixed-use urban brownfield redevelopment company. We've been working for 35 years now. And my partner Danny Gans and I actually met in college in the 1970s and began buying and renovating brownstones in Hoboken in the late 1970s, and that's where the name of the company comes from, the Hoboken Brownstone Company. Within less than 10 years, we started getting involved in industrial projects and converting industrial property, and many of those industrial properties were contaminated because they had been in operation for, in some cases, over 100 years. So that's where we learned the brownfield world and the remediation world, which is applicable to this project, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. I actually got introduced to the project at the National Brownfields Conference. I was speaking on a panel about brownfield redevelopment in Atlanta in 2006, and one of the consultants came up to me who had an office in Rentham, which is the town over from here, and they did environmental remediation work, and they were interested in getting the work on the Southwood Hospital property. And so they introduced me to the property, and I told them that if ultimately we were successful at getting the property positioned for development, they would get the redevelopment work. So that's how I met the site. I began negotiating with the owners at the time, which was Caritas Healthcare Systems. Spent about 2 years negotiating with Caritas, and then a hedge fund came along and bought the other 6 hospitals that were part of the Caritas healthcare system. And this hospital, which was a non-operating unit, transferred back to the Archdiocese. I then began negotiating with the Archdiocese, and after 2 years, in April of 2014, signed a contract to purchase the property. It's subject to getting zoning approvals, it's subject to getting environmental approvals, and it's subject to getting a wastewater treatment plant approved and permitted for the property. So we're now working on the first phase of those contingencies, which is the zoning contingency. I guess before we get started with all of that, you wanted to introduce the Community Advisory Committee that's been working with us since June of 2014 and diligently processing the application and talking about the plans and the various aspects of the plan. So I'll turn it back over to you to do that.
Sure. One of the things that this committee's been doing is try to get to a point where we have a development agreement between George's company and the town of Norfolk. we've reached a point where the development agreement is, we've hit the major points, and we're pretty satisfied with what we have at this point. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this presentation. One of the members is someone you know here in Norfolk, is Jim Lehan. He's a selectman. He is retired from the financial world after about 30 years in that world. He's been on the school committee, both in Norfolk as well as the KP school committee. He's been involved in many different things in the town, as well as hockey as a coach and also an official. So that's one member. We've got John Weddleton, who's a local developer. He's a member of the planning board. He's on the Conservation Commission. And
Chairman, I believe.
Chairman of the Conservation Commission, yeah, and very involved in town, and is always looking to help things out. Another gentleman who's been involved in this project is Tom Gilbert. He's the chairman of our Board of Health. He's lived in town for about 43 years and is a professor at Northeastern University in Boston. Tom has been very helpful in moving this project forward. Adds a lot to the whole dynamic. Another member is Peter Diamond. He's been a member of this committee right along, resident of Norfolk. A lot of folks know Peter. Joyce Terrio, also on the, I think she's on the Conservation Commission. And
Vice chair.
She's the vice chair of the Conservation Commission. She's lived in town for about 31 years and has been involved in many different boards and commissions. Another member who comes from the planning board is Walter Byron, another retiree, and has served on the school committee in the 70s, has been involved in many different aspects in town, has children that have grown up and moved on, and he's been working very diligently and helping out in this project. We also have Chris Weeder, who is a local resident. He's on the Zoning Board of Review. I think he's the co-chair of that, or vice chair. He's also the animal control officer in Rentham. Chris has been very helpful in this project. And then you have another staff member like myself would be Bob Bullock. He's the building commissioner. And Bob has been involved in many projects in town, saved us thousands of dollars on lots of things that he's done in terms of construction. And then myself, I'm the town planner. And I started here about a year ago, just about when this project began. And I've learned a lot since I've been here and hope to be able to help this project move forward. George, with that introduction, can you tell us a little bit about how this plan for redevelopment is going to be put together?
Absolutely. I just want to say, supporting the last portion there that Ray went through, that the advisory committee has been a great group of people to work with. I always work with the community advisory committees whenever I go into a town, and I typically do rather high-profile projects, which this one certainly is. So I just want to take this minute to thank all the members of the committee for the time they've spent and the dedication they've spent and the diligence that they've spent really studying all aspects of this project and thinking it through and working with me in a very cooperative and totally non-confrontational way. It's been a pleasure working with the community, and I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to deliver a winning project. So let me talk about the project now. On the board in the back is the proposed site plan for the project that's been worked out. The property represents approximately 90 acres. And one of the first things we needed to do was we needed to do a wetlands delineation, because a significant amount of the property is wetlands area and therefore off limits to development. So we started out by hiring a firm, and they delineated the wetlands area, which represents about 40% of the site. It's this area right here on the right side of the diagram right here, and that'll be preserved wetlands, non-developable, including the buffer areas around it, which are 100 feet. The project has 4 different types of development aspects to it. The first piece, and the largest piece, is the townhouse section. There's 220 townhouses. There's a community center and a clubhouse in the middle. There's amenities like tot lots. There's walking trails around the entire property and around the townhouses individually. And those townhouses will be age restricted, so people with 55 or older will be the owners and occupants of those. They're not expected to produce, by definition, there won't be any school children coming out of that development. The second asset we're putting together is market rate rental housing, and that'll be in this section right here. There's 2 buildings of 75 units each, with a center area that'll have the common facilities, the health club, the meeting room, the concierge, and service desk. and they're 75 units each for a total of 150 apartments. And those will be split basically 50% one-bedroom apartments and 50% two-bedroom apartments. The third asset on the property is this piece, which is assisted living, and it has two components. There's 180 rooms in the building. 120 of those rooms will be what we call independent living units, which means they'll have a kitchen as well as bathrooms and bedrooms and living areas, just like a standard apartment, but for assisted living level folks. 120 of the 180, and the other 60 of the 180 are going to be for dementia units, for dementia care, and hospice for end-of-life care. So this will be a facility that will encompass 180 altogether units. Now, a portion of that is going to confirm part of the affordable housing obligation for the town of Norfolk. So by taking 25%, 30 units, of the 120 independent living units, the town gets credit for 120 affordable units. And that'll bring the town's compliance, which is required to be 10% of the housing stock, from approximately where it is now, about 4% of the housing stock, up to about 7% of the housing stock. So it's almost doubling the amount of affordable housing in town in that portion of the project right there. The last piece of the project is the commercial piece, and there's 16,000 foot of retail space on the ground floor and 16,000 feet on the second floor, which will be retail on the ground floor, office on the second floor. All of that has parking associated with it as per the code. The area at the top here will probably be where the wastewater treatment plant's going to be. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but that is essentially the entire plan.
Wow, quite a big plan. I think your ideas are great ideas, and
Thank you.
I like the plan. There's certainly some fiscal and financial aspects that this plan is going to either help or impose upon the town. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. We prepared, at the request of the advisory committee, a fiscal impact analysis, which is being made available on the website, along with the other information we're going to present. Ray's going to talk about how you can access that at the end of the show. But essentially what we did was we analyzed the existing municipal budget, and we analyzed the overall budget, we analyzed the school budget, the municipal budget, and we analyzed the effect on property taxes. And just to summarize the results of it, because the details are all available in the book, the impact on the overall town budget is positive. There's going to be between a $2 and $2.5 million surplus, meaning more tax revenues will be collected from the property than are expended in additional services. The impact of the school budget, same basic effect. There'll be a net surplus of approximately $1.5 million to the Norfolk Public School District and the King Philip High School District. And that's based on the additional school funding that'll come out of the property taxes minus the increase in cost. We're projecting that there'll be between 21 and 68 additional students put into the school system. And the results of the demand studies for the schools are that the King Philip High School demand for students is actually trailing off now. And then at the middle schools, which is the Norfolk Public Schools and the Rentham Public Schools and the Plainfield Public Schools, which are the feeder schools for the high school, they're all dropping off in enrollment rather dramatically as the projections go out over the next 10 years. So having the additional 30 to 60 students, we believe, is not going to cause an increase in facilities requirement at all. It's just going to increase the staffing requirements. So when you take the additional cost to the system and you put against that the additional revenue being paid into the system, there'll be approximately a $1.5 million surplus in the school system. The municipal budget reflects that too. There'll be approximately a $1 million surplus in the municipal budget, and that's a result of $1.4 million of additional taxes and approximately $400,000 of additional services required, so about $1 million budget. All of that results in an impact on local property taxes. Local property taxes over the last 10 years have been averaging a 4.9% per year increase. Based on the projected tax revenues from this project, which we're estimating is going to be assessed at approximately $170 million, that 4.9% increase in taxes will slow down to 3.2%. So over the, what does that mean for the average homeowner? Over the life of the construction, which we're estimating to be 10-year build-out, the average homeowner will save about $12,000 in taxes over the 10 years. At full build-out, we're expecting the taxes will be approximately $2,100 a year lower than they would otherwise be without the development. And that represents approximately a 16% reduction in property taxes. And we're going to end up with a chart that looks like this, where your taxes without the project would have been up at this level, and with the project they'll be down here about $2,100 less on the average homeowner's property tax bill. So that study is available on the website. You can see all the details and the projections and the assumptions that went into it. And that's the result of our fiscal impact analysis. We believe the project's going to have a positive result on the town, reduce people's property taxes, cover all the costs, the additional costs and services needed, and still result in a reduction of property taxes.
Well, that sounds great. Can you tell us, we spent a lot of time on this development agreement to get to a point where we think we want to work with you, and we have a project that we want to work on. Can you tell us something about the development agreement and how that's been put together?
Absolutely.
I know there's a lot of details that we went through, and that also will be available on the town website for
Great.
people to take a look at too.
So I'm going to go over the developer agreement in terms of what the important points are and the major points are. As Ray said, the entire agreement will be on the website, available for anybody to download and read through. But essentially, a developer agreement is a contract. It's being prepared by the city. It embodies the agreements that have been made between me representing the development team and the advisory committee representing the interests of Norfolk. And it's got many components to it that have been negotiated and agreed to, and at last Monday night's meeting, the advisory committee unanimously voted to approve it, the terms of it. It's being redrafted now by the town, and will be available literally within the next day or two for anybody to look at. But the major points are environmental issues. Everybody that is familiar with the site at all knows there are some environmental areas of concern. There are actually 4 environmental areas of concern. The first one is there are certain types of materials that were used in the earlier days of construction when the hospital was constructed that are now known to be hazardous materials. For 2 examples, there's asbestos, which was used as an insulation material, and there's also mercury, which was used in the mercury halide lamps that were used in the hospital. All of the hazardous materials, including those 2, need to be cleaned out before the demolition of the hospital. So there'll be a demolition contractor. He'll hire a licensed site professional, licensed site remediation professional. All the hazardous materials will be removed and disposed of in accordance with the regulations. And then once the hospital is completely cleaned out of all of those types of materials, then the hospital will be demolished, and all the outbuildings around the hospital will be demolished, and the underground footings and foundations and utility lines will all be removed. The second environmental area of concern was involved in around an oil spill that occurred about 1983, I believe it was, when there was heating oil being delivered to the hospital, and apparently it spilled, and it's underneath the northeast corner of the building right now. There are monitoring wells that were put in by the owners, the Caritas folks that owned it when this happened, and they've been monitoring it, and they've been pumping the oil that's been coming up into the sump pumps in that area of the hospital for all these years, decades since then. So the monitoring wells are not completely surrounding the spill, but the preliminary results coming from those wells, which have been monitored since the spill, are that the spill is not moving anywhere. We're going to be doing a complete site investigation, which is going to verify that fact and determine exactly what the horizontal extent of the plume is and the vertical extent of the plume, and then we're going to come up with a remedial action work plan that will be appropriate to address that concern. The third environmental concern on the property is a landfill. And as some of you may know, and as history would prove out, you know, before there was trash pickup, people normally just found a place on their property, and that's where they dumped their trash. And that's what happened here. The Southwood Hospital, which was built in the mid-1800s, had a landfill area where they used to dump their refuse, and that needs to be addressed. There are monitoring wells that were put around the landfill as a result of an earlier order by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and they've been monitoring the landfill for a good I'm going to say about 20 years now they've been monitoring it. There are no detectable impacts coming from the landfill and affecting the water under the site or the water in the wetlands area around the site. Nevertheless, we are going to be doing a site investigation of the property, a thorough investigation of the landfill. We're going to add additional wells. We're going to do test pits. We're going to figure out exactly what's in there. And if there's anything in there that is hazardous and needs to be removed, it will be removed. Part of the developer agreement was an agreement that we would pay for the town to hire a licensed site environmental professional. And that environmental professional will basically have two jobs. He's going to work and represents the town of Norfolk's interest, and he's going to work with our licensed site professional who's going to be representing the development team, and they're going to agree on exactly what the site investigation work is going to be all about. The typical first step in addressing a brownfield site is to come up with a site investigation plan. And that site investigation plan dictates things like how many wells are going to be drilled, how many borings are going to be taken, how many test pits are going to be taken, where the location of all of those things are going to be, how many samples. Those types of specifications are all involved in a site investigation plan. So once our licensed site professional comes up with what he believes is an appropriate site investigation plan, he'll be working with the town's licensed site professional to come to agreement, so that everybody agrees that what's being investigated and the extent of what's being investigated and the methodology of how we're going to investigate these areas of concern is agreeable to both parties. The second part of his job is going to be working with our licensed site professional on the actual remedial action work plan. So once a site investigation is performed, the next step in the process is to come up with a remedial action work plan, which is the plan of attack as to how we're going to address the contaminants and hazardous materials that were discovered during the site investigation. So again, same process. Our licensed site professional will develop a draft remedial action work plan, which will respond to the site investigation results, and then the town's licensed site remediation professional will go over that with him and make sure that he concurs that the plan of attack and the remediation work that's going to be done to implement the remedy is appropriate. And all of this will be done within the mandate of the Department of Environmental Protection, which is basically their charge is to protect the environment and to protect human health. So we will be following all the rules and regulations to meet those two objectives as we approach these environmental issues on the property. The next part of the developer agreement talks about the developer contribution for impacts. And what we've agreed to in that regard is that there'll be a maximum of $3.8 million contributed to the town budget for the impacts that are going to be caused by the development. And that's basically two components to that. One component is a public safety component. There's going to be a new ambulance going to be purchased, and there's going to be new payroll made available for staffing purposes for police and fire and EMT types that'll be working with we'll have additional work to be done as a result of the population and the different asset classes that are going to be built on this property. So $800,000 will be added to the public service line item on the budget by a contribution from our team. The second piece of this is an additional municipal water well. Norfolk gets its water from wells, and they're planning, and have been planning before I got here, they were planning an additional municipal well, and they have a consultant right now studying where they're going to be able to locate that and doing the various tests that are involved to determine an appropriate site for a productive new well for the town. So we've agreed to produce $1.5 million, which will pay for the new municipal well, or pay its share of the new municipal well. And then if there's treatment required, once the well starts to pump water, they're going to be able to determine whether or not treatment's involved to get that to potable drinking standards, and we will make available an additional $1.5 million if there needs to be treatment on the well. So a minimum of $1.5 million to a maximum of $3 million for an additional municipal well to add to the town water supply. The next portion of our negotiation had to do with sewer and stormwater. And we're going to, Norfolk does not have sewage capacity to be able to address this project of this size, which requires about 88,000 gallons per day of water and produces about the same amount of sewage. And so we're going to put a wastewater treatment plant on the property that will handle all of the property's wastewater and stormwater needs. That plant is currently projected to be in this area of the property right here, which is not in the wetlands area and is surrounded by the various assets that are going to be constructed on the property. We're doing hydrogeological testing, and we're going to be able to determine the capacity of the ground to be able to absorb 88,000 gallons of treated water, and those results in the engineer's report will be available probably sometime in the next month. We are going to have to apply to the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection for permitting for that, and there'll have to be engineering that'll go into that, and plans and specifications and all of that will be submitted, and we're hopeful that, assuming the test results are that the property is suitable for this, and then we get it permitted, that's a major hurdle for the property, and we're proceeding on that right now. We're doing the hydrogeological testing. Once the zoning approval is done and then the environmental investigation is done, we'll begin designing the plant and getting the plant permitted. The last major component of the developer agreement talks about phasing. There was a concern by the advisory committee that the affordable housing units that are being produced, the 120 affordable housing credits that Norfolk is going to get, actually be produced. And so since that is one of the major benefits of the property, they were concerned that the project gets developed simultaneously so that all of the assets get built, including the affordable housing part. And so what we agreed to do was we agreed that the townhouses could begin construction right away at a rate of about 80 townhouses per year, which would take about 6 years to build that out, and that the other aspects of it, the apartments and the assisted living portion, the apartments being right here, 150 apartments, and the assisted living we talked about, the 180-room facility there, would be built 1/3 each over the first 3 years of construction. So by doing that, we're guaranteed that the affordable housing component, the assisted living, gets built before the townhouses and the apartments, simultaneous with the apartments getting completed, and at about the halfway point of the townhouses getting complete. We also decided that the payments, permitting of those projects, I should have actually mentioned that when we talked about the developer contribution. What's the timing of the developer contribution? And it has to do with the phasing, so I think it's appropriate to add that now. So the $1 million of the $3.8 million payment will be paid at the closing on the property. When we take title from the Archdiocese of Boston, there'll be a payment of $1 million to the town, which will go towards that $3.8 million contribution. The balance of the $2.8 million will be paid as the permits are drawn to build the various aspects of the project. So by doing it based on, as a condition of being issued building permits, we can be assured that the town's going to get paid, because if we don't get the building permits, we don't build anything. So that was the last aspect of the developer plan that will be memorialized in the contract. And that concludes the presentation.
What do you think for timing and a schedule? How long do you think it's going to take to develop this entire project?
Well, right now the schedule would be that we're hoping to have this zoning overlay district in front of the town at the town hall meeting in November, and assuming the town votes favorably to allow the overlay district to be created, to create this plan, then we will move into the environmental investigation. That's expected to take 6 months. Which takes us into almost to the midway point of 2016. Assuming we get a satisfactory site investigation and we have a satisfactory remedial action work plan, and the cost of all of that is still reasonable enough for us to proceed, we'll go into the permitting, the design and permitting process of the wastewater treatment plant.
How long do you think that'll take?
That is,
what do you think would be?
The engineers are telling me you're probably looking at about 2 years to get that done. So that takes us up to 2018. 2017, 2018 is probably when the closing on the property is going to occur. And then a 10-year build-out. So we're looking at 2027 probably for completion of build-out.
Okay. So that lets everyone know what to expect as we move forward, and so people can get more information as we go ahead too.
Yep.
I'm not sure if we missed anything. I think you did a great presentation, George.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
This information, as we had said, was going to be available on the town website, and that if you can look on there, we'll have more information. We'll have the documents that George has presented. This board will be there, as well as the development impact statement and the development agreement. So thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.